How many of you at one time or another had blamed your parents or your genetics for your inability to lose body fat or to get in shape or something under that umbrella? I'm sure just about everybody at some time or another has. Like, I blame my parents for having these really skinny ankles, not having calves like I should have them. My sister got all that. But that's genetics, right? But I want to talk to you guys about the one thing that could be more powerful than genetics, and that is your microbiome. And I recently was listening to a podcast with a very well-known doctor who studies more so in the area of brain health, and was even talking about specifically the effect of the microbiome on that. However, what he talked about actually goes way beyond just your mental health, but your physical health as well. And many times, when we blame our parents or our genetics for our inability to lose fat, or maybe when growing up, we were heavy and we blame our parents for that because genetically, yes, some of that gets passed down. However, the way that gets passed down is not that you were just born fat, you were just born into a fat family, but rather what we know now is that so much of the genetics that get passed down to you are influenced by your gut microbiome, meaning this goes into a realm called epigenetics, meaning there's certain switches that you can turn on and off, which trigger maybe the switch for you to store fat easily. And so, yeah, you're coming out the womb a little bit behind the eight ball because, well, your parents, maybe their parents before them were not very health conscious. And because of that, each generation continued to get obese and continued on with the same habits. And now you are suffering as a result of that. However, it's not that you are inherently obese, that you are inherently just bound to be fat forever. It's that the switch has to be turned off. And the way we turn these switches on and off, one of the ways specifically is based around your gut microbiome. And so what I wanted to talk to you about today are some of the actionables for helping to heal your gut, because the reason why we want to focus on this, I think, is best highlighted by a few studies that have come out around this topic, in which, now this one, I know I'm going to have some animal lovers be like, I can't believe that they would do something like this, but researchers can be sadists, let's just say that. They actually did a mice study where they actually made a group of mice anxious. They intentionally made the mice anxious. Now, how they went about doing that, I do not know. I don't need to know the details. I just need to know results of studies. And what they found was they took these mice who were very anxious, and then they had these other mice that they basically trained up to be fearless. So these were not anxious mice at all. These were very fearless, very forthcoming type of mice. Now, what they did next was absolutely incredible. They actually took the microbiome from the mice that were fearless and implanted it in the mice that were anxious. And guess what happened? The mice that were anxious suddenly became fearless. And now, could that just be coincidence? No, because they switched it around and they implanted the microbiome in the anxious mice into the fearless mice. And guess what happened with them? They became anxious and scared. Crazy. But they've also done this same exact microbiome experimentation, but as it relates to fat loss, where they took the microbiome of very thin, healthy mice and put it in mice that had been obese. And the obese mice became thin and healthy, and the healthy mice became obese when they got implanted with the obese mice's microbiome. Now, this is not just experiments on mice we're talking about. A real life experiment that I found really, really compelling around this topic had to do with a mother and daughter. And what basically happened was the mother, was not feeling well. She had gone into the hospital because she was experiencing some of these stomach pains. Doctors couldn't necessarily figure out what it was, but what these doctors from Harvard actually realized was that based on the current research, if they could find somebody who genetically matched up with the mother, but who had healthy gut, that they could experimentally try to implant that individual's microbiome in the mother's and see what happens. And so the person they found was her 10-year-old daughter. So they go ahead and they implant the daughter's microbiome into the mother, and guess what happens with the mother? Her stomach pains cleared up immediately, gone overnight, never to be had again. But there was one little side effect. The mother started gaining weight like crazy over the course of the next 2 years, accumulating upwards of 60 pounds in the course of 2 years. And they couldn't understand why this happened until they took a better look at the daughter, realizing that although she had a very healthy gut, she was actually obese for her age. And this was something that genetically came from the father's side because the mother had been thin her entire life. Here's a woman in her 30s who's been thin her entire life and then suddenly gained 60 pounds over 2 years. That does not happen accidentally. And there were no changes to her nutrition. There were no changes to her diet. Things remained relatively the same as they always had. But for whatever reason, she started gaining all this weight until upon closer examination. And so this goes to show us that although genetically we may be predisposed, and things like your muscles, okay, I'm not changing the size of my calves. That's not going to happen. You can't change that with microbiome. But as it relates to your health, your energy, your fat loss, like those things, your mental health, all those things are controlled by your gut microbiome and even your muscle development to some degree. So if you can create that healthy environment in your gut, then the chances of you losing fat and keeping fat off are a lot greater. Now, for those who say, I don't understand why the scale doesn't move, like nothing's happening, I'm doing everything correctly. Well, if that's the case, if you were doing all the things correctly, and I'm going to talk about what some of those correct things are. If you're doing all those things correctly and it's still not happening, then I would be taking a very close examination to your gut health and wondering, what could we do differently? Which leads us to this answer, because there's several things that we could be doing. And some of these things you are already doing. And for some of you, maybe it's just a matter of time to get to that tipping point on the scale where the health of your microbiome is so great that now things start moving in the direction that you want them to move, that you have turned those switches on, those epigenetic switches, and now your body is doing exactly what it was intended to do in the first place. So one of those things, obviously, fasting, right? So fasting, fiber, forego sugar, fall asleep. I had one more here. It's not here now, but it was find peace, meaning we need to lower our stress levels. All of these things, fasting, fiber, forego sugar, fall asleep, favor exercise, and find peace. All of those things are the things that will trigger a healthy gut environment. Now, if you are faltering in one of these areas, if you are a person who you're telling me, Mike, I do the fasting, and I know most of you guys are fine on the exercise. Don't have to worry about that. Some of you still need help on the sugar side. So again, if you are not foregoing sugar, you really need to put emphasis in that particular area. Also the fiber. Are you getting enough fiber? And listen, sometimes it's not easy from our nutrition to get all the fiber we need. This is why, we personally are proponents of taking a pre and probiotic. So that this way you get all of those microbiome healing effects. In fact, like I'm drinking mine right now. I got it mixed in with my Edge. So things of that nature are hugely important. But then how is your sleep? And how is your stress? Those last two are probably the two that most heavily influence your ability to lose that stubborn fat or to get the scale moving. And if you are not getting better in those two areas, then it does not matter how well you do with your nutrition. It does not matter how frequently you exercise. You are still going to find yourself stuck. Now, the crazy thing is that all of these things actually work in an intertwined, very synergistic way. Because if your gut health is improving, then guess what? So is your mental health. So is your sleep. So is your stress. So is your control over sugar. But what you need to do is focus on the low-hanging fruit. What are the things that you could easily take care of right now? And if you take care of those things right now, then the other things will gradually start to fall into place. And if they're not, that just means you need to put a little bit more focus in those areas. So I hope this gave you a little bit of insight into the things that you could be doing to affect yourself and stop blaming genetics and start looking at the things that you can control, because at the end of the day, your microbiome, it is far more powerful than your genetics. Take care, guys.